everyone. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. I'd like to welcome you to the book launch for Shivaun's wonderful new middle grade fantasy. Hopefully you can see the cover, the gorgeous cover. The Boy, the Wolf and the Stars. Thanks for making the effort to attend, given that we've all just emerged from our very own zombie apocalypse film, especially in Victoria. I'm Rebecca Lim, a young adult and children's author, and I work across the genres of urban fantasy, crime, paranormal, mystery, and contemporary. It's my huge, huge honour to be launching this novel. It was exactly the right book for the way that I was feeling when I was reading it, and it really brought me back to being a kid in a dusty public library, just being immersed in a fresh and complete world that wasn't the very mundane one that my body was actually sitting in. Now, before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri and Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, the first people of country on which we're meeting. We pay our respects to their ancestors and to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to all of Melbourne's first people and the first peoples of the nation whose sovereignty over the lands on which we work and live has never been ceded. Now, I'd like to introduce the lovely Shivaun, and I'm hoping to ask her a few questions before throwing to some audience questions. Shivaun, do you want to say a few words?
Hello from me and hello from Fenchurch, who will be parading up and down in front of the camera throughout this entire event, I'm sure. Thanks so much for coming, well, for going to whatever your screen is and not actually leaving the house, I'm sure, during this time when we're all probably a little bit sick of Zoom and YouTube and various things online. So thank you so much for coming along. And thank you so much for coming to launch my book for me, Beck.
I wish I could actually bash a champagne bottle against the screen or something, but that might be a bit dramatic for everyone. So we'll just do that theoretically. Down to question one. You've had a really interesting writing trajectory and you've written across a number of genres: contemporary, crime, fantasy, short story. Do you have a plan for world domination, or do you write where the heart leads? How did you start writing, and describe the novels that you've written and where they've emerged from, the kinds of themes and ideas that you speak to and want to write about?
Yeah, so I've always been one of those people that's sort of just, I have ideas for that and sort of never contained by the one particular genre. Like and my reading's the same, like I will read all over the place. So I knew going into this career that I'd never be the kind of writer that sort of sticks to a particular age group or sticks to a particular genre, because ideas don't appear to me that way. They come from all over the place. So I've written, so my first novel was crime, and that came about when I was rereading one of my favourite crime writers, Raymond Chandler, and I just thought I'd love to do this kind of novel, like a noir, hard-boiled detective novel, but I would love it to be in the voice of a 17-year-old girl in a suburb like Collingwood. And so that was sort of the guiding principle behind that one. And then I wanted to do something a little bit lighter after that, still heartfelt, but I wanted to dip a little bit more into the romance side of things, more as a challenge, because I found that I find writing romantic moments sort of my kryptonite. I find it a bit difficult.
It's hard for me as well. Yeah.
I find I can't even look at the screen. I'm sort of typing kissing scenes and stuff like that. And so I wanted to challenge myself to lean into that a little bit more and ramp up the romantic sort of side of things. And I wanted to write about organ donation as well. So that's very much firmly in the contemporary with a solid side of romance. But I started writing The Boy, the Wolf and the Stars 10 years ago. So I started writing it before I wrote the two YA novels. So I'd already had sort of middle grade and fantasy ticking along in the background, and writing short stories and poetry and essays and all sorts of things. I just like...
What actually made you put it aside for a little while? Like the way I sort of write books, and it sounds like you do the same, you've got kind of all these things mashed up and you're thinking about problems in the background for, different storylines all at the same time. Like, now, why did you put that one away for a while?
I think because I was scared that I wouldn't be able to write high fantasy, because I knew going in how hard it was. Mm-hmm. And I sort of, being an anxious kind of person, I just doubted that I had it in me to write it, but I just kept sort of coming back to it because I love the story, I love the characters, and I do like to challenge myself. I'm a bit contrary, and most of the time I don't believe I can do something, but if I don't believe I can, well then I really want to challenge myself that I can do it. So I did struggle to understand the genre and how to go about building a world from scratch. I didn't really know what I was doing. I sort of muddled my way through, and I think that's why it did take me such a long time, because I was sort of making it up as I went along, literally, and just sort of feeling doubt often that the story was going to come together.
It's interesting because the book actually has a lot of, there are sort of like mythical elements to it, like Norse-like mythology and other elements to it. Tell me a bit about the mix that went into it. Like, what was the kinds of reading or thinking that went into the basis for this book?
Yeah, so it started as a short story in second or third year of university, and I'd come across this book actually. I later on went and bought myself a copy, but I came across it in the Melbourne Uni Library, and I'd always been interested in sort of all sorts of anything sort of Scandinavian, because growing up I loved the Moomin series, to be Ansem, and so I was sort of attracted to those kinds of stories and stuff. And there was a particular creature in that collection that I was interested in, who from the front looks human, but turn them around and they look like hollowed out tree bark. And so I wrote a short story about a boy meeting that creature, but I wanted to extend the world, and later on I was thinking about in Ragnarok, where the wolves leap into the sky and the stars and the sun and the moon, and I thought that's a really interesting thing to base a world on, because without the stars and the moon in the night sky, well then it's pitch black, and to me that's terrifying, because as a kid I was absolutely terrified of the dark, which a lot of kids are, and I wanted to write something about fear and anxiety. As someone with a lifelong quite severe anxiety disorder, I wanted to write explicitly about those topics and how to come up against fear, and how not to let fear guide your life. So I wanted to make the world something where fears were fairly real, and the night was something to genuinely be afraid of.
Interesting, because I think your entire writing trajectory has actually been about you being really brave. I mean, challenging yourself with, the romance stuff, and, challenging yourself to write high fantasy, because it is really hard. I mean, we were talking about this before we started, that it's easy to, do urban fantasy because you can just stick fantastical characters into an environment that you already know. But creating something from scratch, and I don't know if everyone can see this, but I didn't know this until I read this book, but Shivaun can actually illustrate as well. So she's come up with an entire topography, 7 different ethnicities. And that's really hard to do, to try and sort of build that world before you even start writing the story. Just circling back to your childhood reading influences. So you mentioned the Merman Trolls. Was there anything else that sort of like factored into your love of, fantasy novels? Were there other sort of, like, I remember as a child of the 70s and 80s, like the totally inappropriate covers that used to be on sci-fi fantasy books. So, booby, busty women holding snakes and cups and stuff. So is there like a series or something that sort of fed that love of fantasy novels?
There was my eldest brother, who's a fair bit older than me, was also a big reader, and he had a bookshelf in his room that was sort of like I used to sneak in just to look at the bookshelf, and it was filled with all of Terry Pratchett's work. Mm-hmm. It was filled with all of those sort of Conan the Barbarian type novels with
oiled up men.
Yes, yep. Fabio looking Schwarzenegger type men and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And Asterix graphic novels, and massive thick books on different mythologies. Mm-hmm. And I used to sort of flip through, and I tried reading some of them, but I was sort of mid upper primary sort of, and most of it went over my head. But I was engaged by the covers, but especially I remember the Terry Pratchett Discworld series covers in particular was something I just liked looking at because they were so
involved. Yeah.
Interesting characters, looked like fascinating worlds. So I remember being completely drawn in by those sorts of things. But I think the book that I stole off his shelf that I still have to this day, that's on my bookshelf now, which is not fantasy, but it's sci-fi, is The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is still my favourite book of all time. I mean, I've got Don't Panic tattooed right there.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what that was. Yeah. Okay, that's great.
Don't panic for love of that book, but also
double meanings. Yeah.
And I read that when I was 14. I stole it off his shelf, and that was the book. I have a terrible memory, but I remember reading that and finishing it and just being so in love with it that I went, this is what I want to do. I want to be an author. I want to write books like this.
Yeah, the voice in that was completely unique, especially as a young reader. It was amazing. Yeah. So just other things that went into this book, like do you keep a mood board or keep a journal? Do you sketch out key scenes? Tell us more about your process when you're actually writing something, like, regardless of genre, how do you sort of get started?
Yeah, I do mood boards, and I like to create like a collage and stick it on my computer screen so it's there looking at me all the time. And I'll come up with like a playlist that I can not listen to when I'm writing, because I like silence when I'm writing, but to listen to when I go for long walks so I can think through plot issues and imagine the scenes before I write them down. But I will plan extensively to the point of like spreadsheets and all sorts of things, and maps obviously, and character sketches and everything. And then for the first draft, I like doing speed writing. I like writing it as quickly as possible and just sort of vomiting out the entire story. And in that process, I usually throw out everything I've planned because I discover interesting ideas as I'm writing. But I need that initial burst of planning to feel confident that I can start. And it's just like a safety net that's always there that I can fall back on if I'm ever sort of stuck on where to go. Yeah. But by the end of that first draft, it's completely different. So I'll go back and restructure the whole thing and replan, and then start the process again of writing through and changing everything. And I do that sort of over and over and over again till I get to the point where it feels solid.
And so do you know sort of like how it's going to end before you start, or do you kind of just go off-road for the whole thing and see where it ends up?
I usually have a pretty clear idea of the ending, and the ending's probably one of the few things that doesn't change. Because I think that the ending is usually tied in intrinsically to what the idea of the story is. And so it can feel a bit strange if you don't end up at that place that feels tied in with what it is. So the ending of The Boy, the Wolf and the Stars was always going to be that. And same with Frankie. That ending was there from the beginning. The Tin Heart one altered slightly. That's probably the first time I've ever altered the ending slightly.
And were you happier with the place that you got to at the end of that, or did you sort of wish that you'd kind of stuck closer to your original?
No, I think I found a better ending. I think that the ending that I had initially wasn't the right one for the story, and I think in writing it discovered, oh no, that's not the right ending. I've got to do it this way. So
okay, no, that's great. And I was going to ask you, like, there are hints that there may be a second book. Are you able to tell us, or would you have to kill all of us by giving it away too early? Because it sounds like there could be more to the story.
Yeah, and that's one of the hard things to do, because I only sold the one book, but I knew in my head that there's a whole other second story. And you've got to try and write as much as possible a self-contained story. But anyway, as a writer, I'm always someone that I like to leave some things unsaid at the end. I like endings to be a little bit not entirely sort of neatly tied up. I like a few loose ends. And this one probably more so, because I do have very firm ideas of what happens next, and there's some things that can't be tied up then. But I haven't sold or haven't written the second book. It only exists in here, and it's one of those things where it just depends on how well this book does as to whether or not there's a second one. There's certainly a second one in my head, and if a few years down the track, if it hasn't sold enough to justify there being a second book, if anyone wants to know what happens,
come over coffee and sit down.
I will tell you then. I will tell you at that point, because it's unlikely to be a book by that point. So yeah.
Oh, you never know. I mean, the thing is, in the day and age that we're writing in now, I mean, you could always just do one. That's the thing.
Yeah,
it's
that's
true.
true.
You're not tied to having to do it through a publisher these days. You are the publisher. You can control that journey. Now, do you kind of, I mean, this is probably sacrilegious asking this, but do you have a preference for who you write for? Would you prefer writing for young adult, or do you prefer writing for middle grade? Like, do you find one voice harder than the other, one audience harder than the other?
No, I think because as a writer, voice is probably my favorite thing to write. It's the thing that I initially certainly focus on the most, and because I normally write in first person often, that one's third person, so it took me a while to pull the voice out, because it's a little bit harder to create the voice when it's third person. So it's not necessarily about the age of the reader, it's about finding that specific character voice, or the voice of the whole novel. And that's a unique challenge for every book. And there are slight changes based on the age of your reader, but for the most part it's down to just who the character is. And I focus on it more in terms of finding the character voice rather than finding the voice for the age of the reader.
So have you ever had to take a novel that you've started and completely change up the voice, or has it been quite a natural process where you've kind of mapped it out pretty early on and you haven't had to change it?
With the way that I work, it does change progressively. I don't start off with a clear voice. Because I do that fast writing technique, I generally do that, and then I'll come back and I'll just find those little ticks or the little phrasings that feel exciting to me, where I feel like I think I can see the character in that. And then I will begin to form the voice around those things that I've discovered, and it becomes firmer each draft as to what that voice sounds like. I don't often have the voice from the outset. The thing that I've just finished writing is rare in that I had that voice right from the get-go. I've never experienced that, and it was by and large an easier writing experience because I had that voice from the outset. So a lot of those initial drafts for me are about finding the voice. That's the number one thing I'm looking for first.
And so do you have a sort of good mental picture of what the characters look like before you find that voice? Do you sort of, with all the mapping out and the mood boarding that you do you kind of have a pretty solid idea of how everything looks and feels before you actually start writing?
Yeah, I think I do, because I think I'm a very visual person. I do see things visually, and often before I start writing an idea, I've spent a good year or so just thinking about it. So going on my walks and listening to music and just imagining the scenes play out in my head. So by the time I start writing, I've already sort of created a filmic notion of what the story is, with the scenes have played out very visually in my head already. So the characters are fairly set, and the visuals of the world are reasonably set by the time I start writing, because I've thought through them.
It must be really easy for you then to do for example, action scenes, because if you can see it happening, you're pretty much describing something that you can see in your head, which makes it a lot sort of faster. I think it's really beneficial that you're visual. I think it's great.
Yeah. I find action sequences, the number one thing that I'm thinking of when I'm doing that is it is kind of a curse in a way to be so visual, because I often do over visualize what that scene looks like, and then when I go to write it, I want to describe everything that's
every plant, every tree.
But I'm not the person telling the story. My character is, so I have to constantly shift out of my authorial brain.
Yeah, godlike brain.
What can my character see and experience in this moment? And so that shift is the harder part when it comes to action.
And so that interesting thing you do where you have a playlist, do you have a specific playlist per book, or do you have certain songs that sort of get you into the mood for writing that you use across all of them?
No, it's definitely per book, and it's down to getting the tone right. I think, yeah, and again, it's because I'm quite visual, and it's like creating a film soundtrack. So it's creating something that I imagine would play over the top of the film.
I'm running through the forest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. So give us some of the songs for this one. Like, can you name them?
I'd have to get rid of our screen to do that. But from memory, I had a fair amount of Sigur Rós in there, because that sort of epic, that sort of epic stuff was quite helpful. There was some zombies in there.
Like random screaming?
No, the band. The band from the 60s.
Oh, of course. Sorry, I just thought, zombie soundtrack. Okay.
I don't know whether that would suit the book.
I'd be too freaked out to write, I think. But anyway.
Yeah, no, I can't think off the top of my head what else is on there. Fleet Foxes and stuff like that. Stuff that was quite sort of a little bit folky. Lots of big sort of epic sweeping stuff, and quite a few stuff sort of from that part of the world, like Scandinavia and stuff like that. So some Norwegian artists and Icelandic and various things like that, just to
drop you straight into the mood for it.
Yeah.
Now, tell us a little bit about your beautiful cat Fenchurch, and how that relationship that you have actually informed that relationship that Bo and Nix had in the book, because it was very real.
Yeah. I mean, she's actually sitting in my arms like this to participate right now. So the book is dedicated to Fen, because she's got a similar sort of sassy attitude to Nix, the best friend fox. I've always been really interested in animal characters in books, and personally I'm particularly interested in relationships between humans and animals, because I think they're so vital in particular to mental health and stuff. And if I was going to put this poor boy in this world that's been cursed with darkness, and going to put him on this horrible epic quest where things are going to go awry, and he's going to be put under a lot of pressure, and I wanted to give him a constant comfort in the form of an animal, in the way that for me animals have always been a constant comfort in my life. But I still wanted them to have banter, and to have sort of a vague sort of like sibling kind of bickering kind of feel to it, because I wanted it to be fun. And it was interesting, the other day I was asked about why Nix doesn't speak, because some of the animal characters do, but my thing was that he doesn't speak with words, but they're certainly having conversations, and the way that I have conversations with her all the time, and I know that she understands me, and she definitely talks back. She talks back a lot. She's got a lot of attitude. So yes, it was just about it naturally happened. Nix just appeared in the story, and he just felt necessary to Bo's journey, and he's fairly integral to the plot as well. So yeah, I really liked
Nix. He was a cool character, and it kind of reminded me, not at all as cheesy as it was on television, but that whole Skippy thing where the boy can talk to Skippy, and you don't have to hear any words, you just sort of hear some faint clicking or whatever, but it's that kind of relationship where you don't have to say anything, it's sort of unspoken. So it was really lovely. Did any characters in The Boy, the Wolf and the Stars sort of come to the fore where you didn't sort of think they were going to be particularly important, but they became integral to the plot?
Yeah, I think the scribe is probably...
I love the scribe's voice.
I love her.
Yeah, she was like comedic as well as Greek chorus, all of that stuff, and also, a bearer of information. So she was a great character. Like, how soon did she come up in the writing process?
Well, it was probably about sort of the midway point in which that whole thing came about, and actually initially the excerpts from the True Histories of Evolve were written in a fairly generic sort of fashion, but when she appeared in the novel as a character, she came with all this spark and attitude and chaos, and very eccentric. And then someone at one point sort of said, who she is as a character does not fit her writing.
With the voice, yeah.
Yeah, and I went, that's completely true. So I went through and rewrote all of those entries in her voice. And once that happened, I think I understood the point of those entries more, because initially they were sort of functioning as fairly basic world-building tool. You know, this is what you need to know about this point so you can understand what's happening in the story. But once I started thinking about why she was writing these entries, and then having her address the reader directly, and
that breaking the fourth wall thing was just really good. Like, you love that when you see it in a play, and it was that kind of function in the book.
And then so thinking about the fact if she's all-knowing, well then she's going to know a little bit more, and she's sort of wink wink nudge nudge with the reader a little bit, and sort of hints at things. And I began to see that as what it could do in terms of driving the plot forward. And I think it's always important that everything that goes into a book is sort of functioning in multiple ways, and that even on a sentence level, like everything sort of needs to be not just a nice pretty sentence, but it needs to be pushing the plot forward somehow, or showing who the character is, or
saying something about you, even like layers of meaning, something about Shivaun the author. And I found it was great, because like I think there's a lot of darkness in the book, so I think she's a real sort of light and shade type character. Like she just leavens up some of the drama occasionally and pulls you back so that you know what's happening.
It's definitely
a great character.
Shows some of her entry points purely because it was a dark moment, and we needed her to come in and just sort of reassure the reader that things are dark now, but have a little bit of a laugh now, and there's a suggestion that there's light to come. So it was an important tool for the readership as well.
Yeah, no, I really loved her voice. I thought she was unique. Let me think. Sorry, I'm just looking at the questions that I have for you. I might actually throw to a few of the questions now that people sent in during the week. Somebody's written, I think this is watch or read. I'm not sure if they're online at the moment, but their question was, this book sounds like such a big departure from Shivaun's previous YA novels. Where did the idea for the new story come from? Were there any books growing up that inspired this one? So we've dealt with the Moomin Trolls, but also the fact that your back catalogue is so different. I mean, do you know where you're going to go next from here? Have you sort of worked it? It sounds like you've just finished something. Is that sort of in a similar vein, or is it sort of YA? Or
I've just finished writing another middle grade fantasy, but a very different kind of fantasy. I wrote it, the majority of it this year, and I think I wanted, and I was actually thinking of Moomin Troll and things that Tuvie Jansen said about why she wrote those books, because she wrote it just after the end of the Second World War, and there'd been stuff going on in her private life as well, so that was pretty dark as well. And she said she wanted to write something that was pure comfort, like a total hug for her, as well as would be a hug for her readers as well. And I was thinking about that because I only wanted to write something that was fun and zany and lots of comedy, and was something that I would enjoy the process of writing as much as possible, that there was more light than dark in it and stuff. So I think because of what's been happening, I've written something that's a lot of fun, and I had a lot of fun writing it, and I think it's the kind of thing that if you read it, it would be fun.
That's great. So it's like the Douglas Adams, kind of influence that you had, years and years ago. Terry Pratchett, it's more sort of fun and zany and off the wall.
Yes,
which is a great antidote to these current times that we're in, I think. I had another question from the wonderful Dialeaf Hall, and she wants to know that she said, your books are such incredible page turners. How do you make them so addictive? Is there something special that you bake into them?
Yeah, I'd like to know that about, I was fangirling over you before we started as well. I'd like you to answer this question as well, particularly about my favourite series of yours, The Children of the Dragon. So do you want to go first, or do you want me to start with that?
I think you should start. This is about you, young woman.
Yeah, but I want to hear from you. We know this.
So tell us how you make your book so addictive.
I don't know that I do, and I don't know that that you can sort of have an answer for that. All I know is that I got some mentoring time early on with Kate Forsyth, and
Who's amazing.
Who's lovely, and she gave me a really important kick up the butt, and she said, Shivaun, what I've read, it's lovely, it's beautiful writing, but it's slow.
Oh, okay.
And I went, all right.
Well, the end product is not slow, so
that's the thing. And I had her telling me that for the rest of the time that I was writing it. I was like, don't disappoint Kate, it can't be slow. And I thought of that, like I needed to find a balance, because I still want it to be well written. I still want the writing to be, you know, lyrical and nice, and I want to be evocative, but I want the plot to be moving. I want the reader to be swept along. So I was constantly thinking about getting the pacing right. So I did a lot of edits just focused on making sure that the pacing was steady, and that the reader was always being pulled along with just the right amount of time to pause and feel what the characters are feeling, or get to know the characters as they're getting to know each other and stuff before being sort of swept along by the story.
Was there anything that you left out that you kind of regret leaving out, or it's always hard when you actually chop stuff out?
No, because I kept saying to my editor, the book's too long, I wanted to cut stuff out, and she wouldn't let me. So nothing really got cut out. I mean, I guess the one disappointment is that I never found room to put that initial character that I wrote the short story based around.
The tree
character. I never found room to put that exact character in there. You can feel echoes of it throughout.
And some of the sentient trees and things.
So that's there, but it would have been, I did have a spot where that was going to happen, but it sort of never felt right with the plot, so I ended up having to scrap that. So maybe that's for book 2.
Yeah, no, keep that character for book 2. That's great.
Yeah.
Another question.
Don't think I noticed you didn't answer them.
No one needs to hear from me. So the title, someone wanted to know, you know, the title's really beautiful. Like, where, I guess, was there a feeling that you were trying to get with this particular title? It's quite retro, which is wonderful. Like, was there something that you wanted to, was there something you were sort of giving a nod to?
No, because I can't remember coming up with the title at all. I recently discovered, because I was creating a school talk, and I came across the first draft, and I'd forgotten that it had a different name initially. And I don't know why I changed, and I don't know why I changed that title. I literally have zero memory of coming up with the title.
It was just there after a few drafts.
I have a vague recollection that it was a temporary title. It was supposed to be, and I think it might have been just an element of just, this is a story about a boy and a wolf and stars, and that's kind of what the title was. Like, it's fairly, you know, it does what it says on the tin sort of title. But
but it's classic. It's like a Narnia story, you know. It's a classic title.
That's what someone said the other day, and I went, oh yeah, it is too. I hadn't actually consciously thought of that. I think it was just, and I think it suits it, because I did want it to have a sort of timeless classic feel to it. So maybe unconsciously I was sort of reaching for one of those sort of classic style story titles.
Yeah, it's a beautiful looking, and even the, you know, like even the blurb. Did you have anything to do with that? 4 friends, 3 keys, 1 magical quest. I mean, that is the most wonderfully succinct blurb ever, because, you know, like when you read a blurb and like the entire story is there, including the ending, and you just go, I think you guys gave a bit too much away. That's, you know, that's classic as well. Like, did you come up with those words?
Yeah, I think that just appeared, and I think it is my Australian editor's work. I don't know for sure, because I haven't seen the final American
the American version.
It'll be months away probably, even though it's due out soon. But I have a feeling that that's Michelle's work, and as soon as I saw it I went, oh, that's genius.
Yeah, it's classic.
I wish I had done that. So I love that they did that.
And so, like, maybe tell everyone who's online at the moment sort of the differences working with your Australian editorial team versus your US team, because a lot of people, you know, they want to get into writing, but I think that whole process of moving beyond the actual initial contract with an Australian publisher, for example, is sort of a mystery to them. So maybe talk about that process of working with two editorial teams.
Well, it was strange at first because I'm good friends with my Australian editor, and we usually meet up for a coffee first, and we'll have a talk through the vision for the story, and then post that I'll get the first letter that sort of breaks down the big picture things that I need to work on, and at various times we'll meet up and have a coffee and a chat and discuss things. And I like that face-to-face discussion. It works for me because you can bounce ideas off each other quite immediately, more than you can emailing back and forth. So I sort of said to my US editor at the beginning, I sort of said, this is going to be an interesting process to see how this works, where we're just going to have some phone calls and some emailing. And she sort of said, well, this is how I work with all my authors. And I was like, well, why? Because your other authors in the US. She's like, yeah, but the US is huge and I don't get to meet up with any of them. And I sort of went, oh, it's only because I'm lucky that I actually live quite close to my Australian editor, because it's not just that it's an Australian thing, it's a proximity thing. I hadn't actually thought that through. So I think that what I ended up experiencing is far more common, and I just happened to be a little bit lucky with my Australian experience. So it was just, instead of the face-to-face, we had some lengthy phone calls, talking through things, and then back and forth with emailing. So it was pretty much the same process, but it is slightly weird because you can't have, I find tone in emails and stuff like that difficult to navigate anyway, and you don't have that relationship you've already forged face to face with someone that you know, and so sort of building that over email is an odd experience, but it still worked out really well. And you sort of get the best of both worlds when you've got two editors working on something. You get everyone sort of catching everything they possibly can catch because there's so many extra eyes on it, and I think I was fortunate that we all had the same vision for what the story should be, from all aspects. So even from like the cover and stuff, that when the editor asked what sort of cover I envisaged, I sent back some images and some sample covers that I liked, and it was the same covers that she was planning on sending me and stuff. So we were literally on the same page with pretty much every step. So it was quite a dream run.
I'm very jealous because I think the one time I worked with a US editor, she said, well, why doesn't everyone in this cafe scene just pull out a gun and shoot people? And I was like, it's set in Melbourne, so that would not happen. So at least you didn't get like like them saying, can we go in a whole different direction from your Australian editorial team? So that's kind of good.
I think because it's fantasy, that made a big difference, because certainly in the past when I've had to Americanize my first two YA books, that sort of, because they were working on a finished product and it was just about adjusting things so that readers would not get lost, that sort of gave me a clue that I think it'd be quite hard to edit an Australian set book with American editors, just because there's so much room to misinterpret. Like, I didn't know there were so many words that we used in everyday language that were really incredibly naughty.
Yeah, like being pissed off at someone. Like, you can't, I don't think you can actually say that, or, not for this audience anyway.
Yeah.
So, it's tricky.
There's so many things, like I would get and things I didn't realise, wouldn't be understood. And the weird thing was I had to change, in Frankie, I had to change Maltesers to M&Ms because...
Oh, they don't have them?
No, apparently they do, but they're really not a well-known chocolate, and she was worried that no one would know about them because she wasn't that familiar and most people weren't. And it was like, what? That's so bizarre. Yeah. So when you're working in fantasy, I've made the whole thing up, and no one knows whether these things are,
Yeah, there's no specific sort of trademark title thing for it, so
don't
it's
have
fine.
to worry about capitalizing trash if trash can or whatever it is, and
or saying I think flashlight instead of torch or something. So
curb and whatnot. Yeah.
And so maybe tell everyone who's online at the moment, especially this year, because it's been a little bit different. I know you often do school talks and you do other things like editing and sort of illustration and manuscript assessment and things like that. How has this year looked for you in terms of, the balance between creativity and all the other stuff that you usually do, and how did you change it up because you couldn't deliver it in the usual way?
Yeah, to be honest, initially I don't. All of my school visits, I had like a heap lined up, and I was going to be traveling around the country doing various things and little festivals and stuff, and that was all cancelled. And then as there was sort of that shift to online sessions and stuff, I freaked out a bit about that initially, and sort of thought, I don't think I can do online sessions. I think it's gonna, not being able to see the kids face to face, not being able to interact with them, and that when you see that they're waning, to change things up, and like I need the visual cues to know that I'm doing a good job, and I felt stressed by the whole prospect of it. And so I just went, right, I'm just going to devote my time to writing. I'm just going to get writing done, because that's one thing I can control. There's so little I can control right now, but I can control my story. So for up until, when did I finish it? October. I was pretty much just focused on writing, but also I guess the drawing and illustrating and graphic design and stuff like that was doing Oz Authors Online and stuff. So I was doing a fair bit of work in that way, but that's nice because that felt like I was, again, doing something I could control and helping and feeling like I'm putting a little bit more control on this massively uncontrollable thing. So it wasn't until recently that I've started doing some online virtual school visits and stuff like that, and it wasn't half as bad as I sort of
Were they live? Like, did you sort of pre-record, or did you? I think I've done some dreadful pre-recorded ones. Those poor children, they probably couldn't hear me and they couldn't understand me, and I was speaking too fast. But the live ones, I think, are easier because they can actually speak to you and ask you questions, right? Like, did you find it okay in the end?
Yeah. So it was. Yeah, the little they can put their hand up. You see it down the bottom. So and so's quite cute. Yeah, it's certainly not as enjoyable as the live stuff. I do like getting into schools and interacting and chatting with the kids, and I find that enjoyable. So it's once you sort of get over the fact that I'm not being able to do that. It's not as hard as I thought it was going to be, and it's nice to interact in some way. With young people, so you're sort of going to take what you can get and make the most of it, I think.
Yeah, and this is the amazing thing, because you keep telling me that you are mildly anxious, but like to be comfortable in front of like a classroom of children is really hard.
It's because I'm an teacher, because I had to learn how to do that as a teacher, that I'm just sort of using those muscles the first time I stood in front of a class as a teacher were utterly terrifying. It took me a long time to become a little bit more comfortable with that. So it's just because, even though I've only been doing school visits as an author for the last 4 years, whatever it is, before that I'd been a teacher, so I was sort of drawing on that experience, which is
so you've got this way of shutting off that nerve, that nervous kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's because I've got a little bit of a background in drama that I sort of pull on that, and I just sort of treat it as a performance.
Yeah.
And which is why I find it utterly exhausting as well. Like, as soon as I do an event like that's kind of it. Like, I can only really plan one event.
Yeah. Please don't talk to me after this, because I
will. After this, I will probably collapse in a heap, and it takes a lot of effort to put on performance, Shivaun, and it's exhausting. Yeah,
it's hard work. And so, like, can you give people tips, I guess, about how to pull yourself out of, like a bad spiral or out of a trough? Because we've had a few of those this year. I think all of us, like anyone in the creative industry. So, what are some of the coping mechanisms that you've got?
Yeah, for me, I've mentioned it, walking has always been really important, and I'm lucky that where I am, I'm in between Geelong and Melbourne, and I've got some beautiful nature very close to me. I've got the You Yangs just over there, so I've still been able to do lots of walking out in nature, which for me is extremely calming and important. But I've also I've taken up painting again, just for the pure love of it. And I think just being able to focus my mind on something purely creative that doesn't have any of the worries attached to it that writing does, in terms of, is this good enough? Is it going to sell? Is this, no one going to buy another book of mine again? It's just, I want to be creative. I want to paint. I'm going to do it.
Can you hold up anything for the camera? Do you have anything sort of handy that you can show me? I've told everyone to like try and follow Shivaun on Instagram after this, because she's going to start posting these hopefully.
The nearest one is this little one here that I've done. I do sort of abstract
that's gorgeous
stuff. So that's I'm working on one at the moment, but it's too far away and I've got a cat in my lap. But I also do when I do drawing, generally I do black and white pen drawings and stuff. If you want to see my drawings, I made a trailer for The Boy, the Wolf and the Stars.
That's great. On YouTube?
Yeah, it's on YouTube.
Okay. Well, I have a
look that up. So my friend animated my drawings, so they're more realistic drawings. So it's that's a little bit of fun we did, just to entertain ourselves and put something creative out there.
That's great. So everyone go onto YouTube after this and have a look for that. Yeah. And do you have trouble drawing faces and noses? Because I do. I can't do those. The realistic faces are impossible.
No, when I was in year 8, I got my report back for art, and I remember it distinctly. The line was, even though Shivaun can't draw, she's very enthusiastic. And I was like, what do you mean I can't draw?
That's crushing.
To me, I love drawing. So I spent that entire summer locked in my room teaching myself how to draw. I got some pastels and I just drew, and mainly faces. I enjoy drawing faces over and over and over again. And by the time year 12 came around, I walked away with the art ducks for the school, and I ended up doing a double major in art and creative writing at university. So I showed that year 8 art teacher. I'm that kind of person.
That art teacher's nose in it. That's amazing. Are they still there?
You cannot tell me I can't do something, because then I will go, right, I will do that now, and I will show
150%. I'm just going to go all out and do it. Yeah. That's incredible. Now, I know that the lovely Y is hanging around. Are there, like the voice of God, are there any questions from people who are online at the moment that they would like to ask Shivaun?
Hello. Can you all hear me? Yes. Hi. Thank you so much. That's been so generous. We've had a couple of questions come in. So yes, but if you are watching and like to post your questions, please do so in the chat. But the first question that's come in from the lovely Anna Waitley is, why did, and I think it was early on when you started talking about your various works, Shivaun, is why did you want to write about organ donation specifically? And of course, referring to Tin Heart, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I've talked a little bit about this, but it was because my brother had experienced being an organ recipient. So I was sort of, and when I am experiencing things, my go-to to understand them and to work my way through things is to write about them. So I sort of had those sorts of questions in my head. Luckily, it was a highly successful operation. He's doing really, really well. The book's dedicated to him. But I sort of had those questions like, what's that happy ever after like? And how do you process the idea that, someone passed away for you to live? And if you desperately want to say thank you to that person and their family, but you can't because of privacy laws, and what those things might feel like to a teenage character. So those sort of thoughts were in my head, and that's how I process things, by writing them. And sort of I don't really know what I think about things until I've sort of written 80,000 words on them, to be honest. So that's how I go about things.
I agree with that. I think the world makes a lot more sense once you sort of process it through the filter of fiction. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Voice of God, was there another question?
Yes, thank you. No, I'm sorry, Beck, your audio kind of drifts in and out. It's been okay, but there's been little moments and I can't figure out the tech well enough. My little MacBook Pro isn't advanced enough to up your levels, but that's okay. Well, it's been...
Hopefully it hasn't been too unclear through all this. It's probably my terrible headphones, which are not state-of-the-art, so hopefully everyone's been able to hear this.
Yeah, it drifts in and out, so it starts off soft, and then all of a sudden it kind of kicks in. So yeah, it's all been okay. But no, we've been hearing from both of you, which has been fantastic. Or you would have heard from me earlier, screaming about tech issues. Another question from Alexis D is, and I think you did touch a little bit more, but curious, when you were talking about, I'd love to know, she says, I'd love to know more about the uni short story and how close it was to the final book. And I think you did talk about that a little bit more, but do you want to elaborate?
Hi, Alexis. Alexis is my friend. So it's quite different, the story. So it only took place within that village and the forest. So what happens in the sort of the start of the book, it only takes place in that location, and it was focused on him, Bo, being rejected by the local kids, and his relationship with his guardian, who was a woodcutter in that story as well. But it only it was contained to that forest space, and there wasn't the relationship with Nix. There was a fox character that drifted in and out, but there wasn't that relationship that we see in the story. So it was really only exploring what happens in the start of the book, and that's why I think I was interested in it, because I wanted to tease out about why these things were and what was outside of the forest, and why was he contained to this area, and I had all those sort of questions about it. But it was very different in terms of style, and character names and stuff were all different. But yeah, I did find it recently. I tidied out my office and I did discover it, complete with teacher marks and ticks and crosses and all sorts of things and stuff. So I must reread it and see. But from memory, it's reasonably different.
So was that part of a creative writing class that you did at university, or just something that you sort of just worked on yourself?
Yeah, no, it was for an assignment. I can't remember what the parameters of the assignment were. Most of the parameters were fairly loose in that course. Yeah, I can't remember what it was. I think it was sort of just a generic sort of fiction short story course. It wasn't even supposed to be children's or anything. And I don't know that I wrote that short story with a children's audience in mind either, and that's probably a distinct difference with it as well. I think it was more adult focused for readership, so that's probably a big difference as well.
So did people actually have to critique it? You know, that horrible thing when you go around the room and sort of pull out everyone's stories? Did you kind of do that for this story, or do you remember what happened?
I remember doing that for other stories. I don't remember doing it for that particular story. I know that for that subject, now that I'm thinking about it, we had to pull out sections and submit them with detailed reflections on what that section was trying to achieve and how we came to write it, and that's sort of that reflection process. I remember that. So I think the final submission for that piece wasn't necessarily the short story itself, but it was bits of the short story with the reflection, if I remember rightly.
Okay. And just another question for you about, I guess, some of the main characters in The Boy, the Wolf and the Stars. I guess the adult female characters are really strong. And can you explain sort of, where the Korak princess character came from? And I guess the scribe and the sisters, there was a real sort of background project of really sort of strong women in there. So if you could maybe talk about that, was that a conscious thing?
It was, for two reasons. One being that I was conscious of the fact that there was a big part of the story relied on the fact that his mother had abandoned him, and also the stuff with the moon as well, which I don't want to get into too much for spoilers. And I wanted there to be good positive counterpoints to that. I didn't want it to be 100% negative about mother figures. I wanted there to be the opposite in the story as well. And certainly when I initially wrote it, there was too many characters were awful, other than Bo. Like, it was too many mean characters. I had to go through and tease out, who was a bad character and who was going to be a better character towards Bo.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just sort of, in terms of the plot, sort of dictated who made sense to be a nicer character. But certainly I was conscious of the fact that I needed to offer counterpoints to some very, very negative characters. I didn't want it to be left as too negative. So that was a conscious choice.
Yeah. That was interesting.
Fascinating. Sorry, Rebecca.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Bob.
I think Sarah just wanted to know what marks did the teacher give that story after all that?
This feels really short. It was, I only know because I did find it the other day. It was an H1, which I don't know whether that translates outside of Melbourne.
It translates as extremely excellent.
There we go.
No question about that. No surprises there. Alice also, our lovely Alice at AB Endicott asks, I'd love to hear about how many times Shivaun edits her manuscripts. I'm intrigued by what she said about her process earlier and the time she said she highlights half of everything.
We were talking about that on Twitter. When I've got a chapter or something that's too long, I need to lose it. I learned this activity from Penny Russon, who's an amazing writer and creative writing teacher. When we did it initially, you had to swap your piece with a pair and they would highlight 50% to get rid of in that chapter. And then you would go through and you maybe pick out a couple of bits that you desperately need to keep for plot reasons or whatever, but ultimately you found you could actually get rid of most of what they got rid of because they're not attached to it as they're reading. And I try and replicate that process myself. By just saying I have to delete 50% of this page or chapter, whatever it is, and I will highlight it and I will put it away for a bit and then I will read it and without the highlighted sections, and I'll go, yep, most of this is actually stuff I can get rid of. So, I find that's a helpful thing when I'm trying to cut down on my words. But I do a lot of drafts. I'm a big drafter. Like, each book has like minimum sort of 20, heading towards 50 drafts probably. Like, I'm an excessive drafter, because I paint this way as well. I tease things out slowly and I just sort of throw things at the story, or I'm throwing them at the canvas, and I'm just I see what interests me and then I sort of pull that bit apart and then I change everything else to fit that, and then I end up sort of just changing everything as my stories change dramatically over those drafts, but that's just how my mind works. I slowly layer things and tease things out and scrap heaps of big things, and that's just, it's a very messy, long process, but it's how my brain works.
Read things out to yourself. Like, do you actually do dialogue out loud? Like, are there things that you use or techniques you use to trim stuff down that aren't just highlighting?
I mean, that's the main thing. Is I just go through and cut. I'm actually, yeah, I am, and I think it's because I think after I trained as an editor, I found it easier to be brutal, because I find it a little bit easier to be objective, because I can kind of put on the editor hat for myself. Not 100% objective, because you never can be, but I find that I can be. Right now I'm editor Shivaun and I'm going to be brutal with this piece, and I will just go through and I will cut. And I do keep fairly strict word counts for chapters. I have a very, I need things to be ordered. I need like an even number of chapters overall, and I need a similar word count per chapter, like my brain needs things like that. So I'll have a ceiling of what my word count can be for a chapter. If it goes over that, I must cut. And because my brain just won't accept it going over, like, I will cut until I get underneath that word count that I need to.
So do you sometimes shift it to the next chapter, like things that you don't want to lose, but it doesn't fit the rhythm of this particular bit, you'll just shut it off?
Yeah. If it's so if the chapter's gotten so big, there's like a whole scenes that I can shift out. I certainly do, and I think most authors probably do this. I have a scraps folder where I will temporarily shift things to there, knowing that whole scene could appear later on if it suddenly makes sense at a different point. So I make use of, so I use Scrivener, so I'll have a little folder down the bottom there called scraps, and I'll have for each chapter, I'll have little scraps that I can just pull everything out and shove it there till I think, well, am I going to use this or not? So I didn't catch that one.
Would you recommend Scrivener? Would you recommend that people try it?
I think it's sort of it depends on the individual. I know some people that it just really doesn't work for them, and it really works for me. Like, I think it's maybe worth giving it a go, but I do know that I struggled with it at first. It's kind of a daunting program, and it looks pretty clunky, and the document that comes with it describing how to use it is the world's worst instruction manual. You just got to tease your way through it. You've got to play around with it. Mm-hmm. I certainly love it, and I wouldn't be able to keep track of a story without using it. Like, I can't. My brain doesn't function well in trying to put a story into Word. I can't see the story. It really makes me feel anxious. But because I can see that lovely little binder down the side, and I can see the chapters all laid out, and I can see that we've got this chapter here is full of action, but then the next 3 are as well, and then you've got 3 in a row of quiet contemplation stuff. Well, that's going to affect my pacing. I can see it happening off on the screen at the side there, rather than trying to
work out where it is.
Yeah, and that's just. I think it just sort of depends on how your mind works, and what's going to work best for you. Because some people love Word and it works for them, and that's great.
Yeah, I don't think I could cope with Scrivener actually. I just find that organised, but
yeah. I like organisation. I need things ordered and colour coded, and yeah.
I'm going to be cheeky because I want to ask this question, Shivaun, and I've always been so admiring of you and your ability to adapt to all these different genres, and especially with this one, it just sounds so brilliant and beautiful. And as someone who doesn't let genre or, kind of how you define, let the genres define you as an author. How do you know when you have, with all this playing, how do you know when you have an idea that you can really flesh out into a story or full, and it's not just something you're playing with? Or is it just that you're that amazing and that everything you do just becomes an amazing thing? But how do you know you've hooked on to something that you feel is like, that's going to be the next thing I'm gonna try?
I don't know, and if any of my writers group have turned up tonight, they'll know that often they get plagued with polls of like, here are my next 6 ideas, which one sounds the most interesting to you? And so I do a fair bit of that, and I'll talk it through with my agent as well. But I usually have sort of 4 or 5 ideas on the go, which is because it takes me so long to write a novel. That's kind of important, because that allows me to sort of kind of keep up with things. I've got multiple projects. I'm not just writing something for 10 years and not doing anything else. I wrote Frankie and Tin Heart in the time that it took me to finish off The Boy, the Wolf and the Stars. So that's, it allows me to do that. And I think you don't know until you start writing. I think there's that sort of magical 20,000 word mark, which is generally where you get a sense of whether this story is going to work or not. And it's certainly, I find that when it comes to when I mentor writers or do manuscript assessment stuff, everyone generally talks about that 20,000 word mark. Then stop it, where a story will usually collapse at that point, or that's the point at which they realise, yeah, that's where I can continue going on. That 20,000 word mark is sort of the point. So I do have a lot of ones that I've gotten to that point and I've just went, nah, this isn't working right now. So I think it's more just it's sort of a case of like the Wizard of Oz type situation. Like, I'm standing in front, pretending that I'm this wizard and got these successful books and stuff. There's massive piles of unsuccessful stories hidden off screen that you can't see. And I think we're all like that. We're just sort of, we're magicians. We keep things hidden, so we look successful, but really we're an absolute mess with drowning under the piles of stories that are half finished.
The drawer of shame. Yes.
Yes. So many books in there.
Drawers of shame, I think more than one.
I think we're just coming up to the hour. I think, Beck and Shivaun, it's been so absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and being so wonderful. And do we want to do an official launch or?
Absolutely, consider the book launched, and I think Shivaun's actually
going to nominate someone to have won a prize, I think, as well, possibly.
That requires me having paid attention to who was asking questions. Well, it can't be someone I know. What was one of those middle names in the?
I think we decided. I'm not sure if they're online at the moment, but there was someone called Watch All Red.
That will do, because that's someone I don't know.
Okay.
I think.
So congratulations, you have won your very own, I think, signed copy.
Yes, I will. What I will get you to do is to DM Authors Online Instagram account, because lo and behold, it's me, and we can just talk about getting names that I can sign it to and address that I can send it to. So, what was the name again? So,
Watch All Red, I think.
Watch All Red.
Or it could be Watch All Read. I'm not sure.
Watch All Read.
I'll give it to you after this. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. So if I haven't heard from you, I will nudge you at a certain point, but do try and get in touch with Authors Online Insta first.
So let's consider this wonderful book launched into the world. And is there a special sort of incantation that we have to say at launches or when books are launched? Because if there is one, let me know.
I don't think so. Just please buy
it and read it and give it to everyone. You know, every adventure-loving child. You know.
I mean, Christmas is coming up, so if you're stuck on Christmas gifts, it's perfect for children.
It is. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, and it just got me out of this.
These books.
Stop it!
You're also looking for Christmas gifts.
This book got me out of a reading slump and a sort of mental slump and an everything slump that was caused by COVID. So please, everyone, just rush out and get a copy of this.
I buy all 3 books here. All 3 books on screen, by the way.
We're shameless, absolutely shameless. So thank you, everyone, for joining us, and take care of yourselves in these really troubling times. But this book will make you happy. So go out and read that. And thanks very much. Thanks, Y, as well.
Yes, and thank you, Beck. Thank you so much for doing this tonight. I really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure. So wonderful to see you guys. It's always wonderful to catch up.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.